The 45 dumbest historical facts that are actually epic lies. You've seen the headlines, heard the myths, and accepted them as truth. But what if I told you everything you've been taught is built on a foundation of lies, each one more dangerous than the last? The history books are full of these so-called facts, carefully crafted to shape the world as we know it. But most of them are nothing more than twisted fabrications designed to control the narrative. From the myths that fueled entire wars to the lies that shaped national identities, these stories have been passed down for centuries, unquestioned and unchallenged. But today, we're pulling back the curtain to reveal the shocking truth behind the world's biggest historical deceptions. Stick around. What you're about to learn will change everything you thought you knew about history. Chapter 1. The Myth of the First. Queen Elizabeth. Queen Elizabeth I of England is often called the Virgin Queen, implying she never had a lover or partner in life. The truth? Elizabeth had intimate relationships with several men, most notably Robert Dudley, and the entire virginity myth was fabricated for political reasons. By presenting herself as a virgin, she gained power and manipulated public perception, solidifying her authority over England. Don't you think that the myth of her purity was crafted to solidify her power? Chapter 2. The man who shot Liberty Valance wasn't the first. The iconic Western film suggests a single heroic man brought down the infamous outlaw, Liberty Valance. In reality, the death of Valance was a result of a combination of events with multiple figures involved. The lone hero myth oversimplifies the gritty complexities of the real story, shaping our understanding of justice in the Old West. A single man brought down Liberty Valance, right? Think again. What if the truth was far more complicated and far darker? Chapter 3. The Myth of the Great Pyramids of Giza. The Great Pyramids of Giza were not built by slaves, as commonly believed. They were actually constructed by highly skilled workers who were paid for their labor. This lie, rooted in the idea of oppression, ignores the sophisticated workforce that designed and built one of the world's greatest wonders. It's an oversimplified narrative of exploitation, rather than the ingenuity of a civilization. This absurd erases the true achievements of ancient Egyptian builders and distorts their culture. Chapter 4. The Last Supper wasn't a formal dinner. The famous painting of the Last Supper has been misinterpreted as a calm, serene gathering of Christ and his disciples. In reality, it was far more chaotic, and possibly not even a supper. The truth is, this moment was filled with tension and anxiety, a reflection of the turbulent times and the dramatic shift in Jesus' journey toward crucifixion. The distorted portrayal of this event has shaped how we view one of the most important moments in Christian history. Chapter 5. The Escape of the Nazis in World War II. Many believe that after World War II, high-ranking Nazis escaped to South America in a well-organized operation. While some did, the vast majority of Nazis were captured or killed, and the myth of a massive escape operation was exaggerated. This false narrative plays into conspiracy theories and masks the true aftermath of the war, where justice was served, not avoided. Did Nazis really escape to South America, or was it a convenient lie to cover up the truth? Chapter 6. The Real Story of Cleopatra. Cleopatra is often portrayed as an Egyptian queen with dark skin, when in fact she was of Macedonian Greek descent. The image of Cleopatra as an African queen is a misconception that arose over time, as people wanted to create a narrative of cultural pride and African heritage. The truth is more complicated, with her lineage tied to Greece, not Egypt. This misconception about her ethnicity has shaped perceptions of both Cleopatra and ancient Egypt itself. Chapter 7. The Disappearance of the Roanoke Colony. The lost colony of Roanoke was not mysteriously wiped out. It's now believed that they integrated with local tribes, blending into the population. Instead of vanishing without a trace, the settlers likely survived, adapting to their new environment in ways we didn't fully understand until recently. The myth obscures a more complicated history of survival and cultural exchange. The myth of the lost colony obscures a much more complex history of early American settlers. Chapter 8. The Reign of the Egyptian Pharaoh Tutankhamun. King Tut is often portrayed as a young, ineffectual ruler. In truth, his reign was probably far more impactful than history gives him credit for. Although he ascended to the throne as a child, the political and cultural impact of his reign, especially in restoring Egypt's polytheistic practices, was far more significant than the boy king narrative suggests. The myth of his weakness has overshadowed the real power struggles and achievements of his reign. Chapter 9. The Invention of the Telephone. Alexander Graham Bell is often credited with inventing the telephone, but in reality, Elisha Gray invented a similar device simultaneously and was robbed of the credit. Bell's invention became the focus of history largely because of his legal victory over Gray. This pivotal moment in technology was shaped by who had the power to control the narrative, not who actually invented it. It highlights how history often favors the louder voices and the more powerful forces in society. Chapter 10. The Real Reason the Titanic Sank. The Titanic didn't sink because of a single iceberg. It was a combination of poor planning, design flaws, and the social class distinctions that plagued the ship's passengers and crew. The myth of the iceberg oversimplifies the disaster, masking the true structural and societal failures that led to the tragedy. Don't you think the story of the iceberg oversimplifies the disaster? Chapter 11. The Columbus Discovered America. Myth. Christopher Columbus is often credited with discovering America in 1492, but in reality, the continent was already inhabited by indigenous peoples and had been visited by Norse explorers centuries earlier. Columbus's journey didn't discover an empty land, but initiated the start of European colonization, which had profound consequences for the native populations. This lie continues to obscure the true history of the Americas and the people who lived there long before Columbus. Chapter 12. Betsy Ross didn't sew the first American flag. The popular story of Betsy Ross sewing the first American flag is largely a myth. There's no concrete evidence that Ross made the flag, and the story wasn't widely known until a century after the Revolution. The flag's design was actually the work of multiple individuals, including Francis Hopkinson and others. This was just one of many lies that would set the stage for an even bigger deception. Chapter 13. The Robust Health of the Vikings. Vikings are often depicted as fierce, hardy warriors, immune to illness and starvation. But in reality, the Viking population faced harsh living conditions and struggled with malnutrition, disease, and early death. Their robust health was likely more myth than reality, romanticized by modern culture to create an idealized warrior image. The truth behind Viking health challenges has been overlooked, replacing the historical reality with a fabricated image of strength. Chapter 14. George Washington's Wooden Teeth. George Washington is frequently said to have worn wooden teeth, but this is a myth. His dentures were actually made from ivory, gold, and other materials, not wood. His dental problems were severe, and these myths have been perpetuated over time, overshadowing the true struggles he faced. This false tale of his wooden teeth misrepresents the reality of Washington's life and the challenges of the early American founding. Chapter 15. The Pocahontas Story. The story of Pocahontas is often oversimplified, especially the romanticized version with John Smith. In reality, Pocahontas was a young girl who was kidnapped and manipulated by the English to facilitate peace with native tribes. The love story was created much later, mainly for propaganda purposes. The myth of Pocahontas obscures her true story and the violent history of colonialism. Chapter 16. The Spanish flu wasn't just in Spain. Despite its name, the Spanish flu didn't originate in Spain. It spread across the globe. And Spain was one of the few countries not to censor reports of the outbreak, leading to the misleading name. The flu's true origins are still debated, but the myth about Spain has stuck. But this story doesn't end here. What followed was even more devastating, and is still impacting us today. Chapter 17. The Great Discovery of the New World. The discovery of the New World by Columbus is often presented as a singular event, but many other explorers, such as the Norse and the indigenous peoples, had already reached and settled parts of the Americas. Columbus's discovery was the beginning of European colonization, not the first human arrival. The myth of Columbus's great discovery distorts the real history of the Americas and the civilizations already thriving there. Chapter 18. Napoleon's defeat at Waterloo. The Battle of Waterloo is often framed as Napoleon's inevitable downfall, but his defeat was influenced by a series of strategic missteps, poor communication, and betrayal from his allies. The idea that this battle marked his final defeat oversimplifies the complex political and military situation leading to his fall. Waterloo was a devastating loss, but it wasn't the simple, conclusive battle the myth suggests. Chapter 19. The First Man on the Moon. Neil Armstrong is celebrated as the first man to walk on the moon, but the truth is, the U.S. space program had other astronauts who also orbited the moon and performed critical space missions before Armstrong's famous steps. The narrative focuses heavily on Armstrong's moment, overshadowing the contributions of others in the Apollo missions. The myth of the first man distorts the collaborative nature of the space program and the efforts of all the astronauts involved. Chapter 20. The Sinking of the Lusitania. The sinking of the RMS Lusitania in 1915 is often cited as the primary reason the United States entered World War I. However, the truth is more complicated. The Lusitania was carrying munitions, and its sinking by a German U-boat was part of an escalating conflict. The myth of the Lusitania as a neutral vessel manipulated public sentiment and oversimplified the complex reasons for America's entry into the war. Chapter 21. Albert Einstein wasn't a bad student. It's commonly believed that Albert Einstein was a poor student, but this myth is far from the truth. In reality, Einstein excelled in mathematics and physics as a child. The story of his academic struggles was fabricated later to create a more inspiring narrative. His real challenge was fitting into a rigid school system, not a lack of intellectual ability. The myth of Einstein's bad grades only adds to the genius mystique, obscuring his true potential as a young student. Chapter 22. Julius Caesar, Crossing the Rubicon. The famous phrase crossing the Rubicon is often used to signify a decisive, irreversible decision, but the truth is more complex. Julius Caesar didn't just make a bold move. His crossing was heavily influenced by political maneuvering, not an act of reckless defiance. The myth oversimplifies the complexity of his decision, making it seem like a fateful moment rather than part of a larger strategy. This misses the political realities that shaped his choices. Chapter 23. The Dark Ages were not dark. The term dark. Ages implies a time of ignorance and barbarism, but this period of European history was not as dark as is portrayed. There were significant advancements in science, architecture, and philosophy during this era, especially in the Islamic world and parts of Europe. The Dark Ages label is more a product of later centuries than a reflection of the actual historical period. The myth of the Dark Ages distorts the true intellectual and cultural progress of the time. Chapter 24. The Great Wall of China is not visible from space. It's a popular belief that the Great Wall of China is visible from space. But that's simply not true. Despite its length, the wall blends into the surrounding landscape, making it nearly impossible to see with the naked eye from orbit. The myth likely stems from its immense size, but it remains a misconception. This myth about the Great Wall's visibility reflects how easily we exaggerate human achievements for dramatic effect. Chapter 25. The Battle of the Alamo was not a heroic stand. The Battle of the Alamo is often depicted as a heroic last stand, but in truth, the defenders were poorly equipped and strategically outmatched. The real story is about the harsh realities of war and the tragic consequences of miscalculation. The myth of heroism oversimplifies the complex history and sacrifices made during this pivotal event in Texas's fight for independence. The heroic narrative masks the reality of the Alamo's tragic and costly outcome. Chapter 26. Joan of Arc wasn't just a peasant. Joan of Arc is often portrayed as a humble peasant girl, but she came from a relatively well-off family. Her father was a farmer who owned land, and she received a good education for her time. The myth of Joan's humble origins adds to her saintly narrative, but it oversimplifies the context of her rise to prominence. You'd be wrong to think this was just one mistake. It was the first of many lies that followed. Chapter 27. The First Pirate Code. The notion that pirates had a standardized pirate code is largely a myth. While some pirates did have codes, they were not universally adopted, and they varied greatly. The pirate code myth is a romanticized idea, created in literature and films, not an accurate reflection of pirate life, which was chaotic and often brutal. This may seem like a minor detail, but its consequences were nothing short of catastrophic. Chapter 28. The End of the Roman Empire. The fall of the Roman Empire is often portrayed as a sudden collapse, but it was actually a slow, gradual decline over centuries. Internal corruption, economic collapse, and external invasions all played a role in the empire's transformation, not just a single, cataclysmic event. The myth of its sudden fall oversimplifies a complex period of history. Chapter 29. The Myth of the Wild West. The Wild West is often imagined as a lawless, violent frontier, but in reality, it was much more organized. Many towns had local governments, sheriffs, and laws. The myth of the Wild West as a chaotic, untamed place was largely created by Hollywood and dime novels, distorting the actual dynamics of frontier life. But just when you thought it was over, things took an even darker turn. Chapter 30. The Invention of the Light Bulb. Thomas Edison is often credited with inventing the light bulb, but in reality, he improved upon an already existing design. Several inventors, including Joseph Swan, developed early versions of the light bulb. Edison's success came from creating a commercially viable product, not the initial invention. The myth exaggerates his role, overshadowing the contributions of others. The myth of Edison, as the sole inventor, ignores the collective efforts that brought the light bulb to life. Chapter 31. The Lost City of Atlantis. The myth of Atlantis suggests a powerful, advanced civilization that sank beneath the waves. However, there's no archaeological evidence supporting the existence of Atlantis, and the story was likely inspired by ancient Greek philosopher Plato's allegory of an ideal society. Over time, it transformed into a legend of a lost civilization, blending myth with history. The myth of Atlantis distorts real ancient civilizations and fuels fantasies of hidden mythical empires. Chapter 32. The War on Terror. The term War on Terror suggests a global united effort to fight terrorism, but in reality, it was used as a justification for broad military actions and geopolitical manipulation. The phrase oversimplifies the complexities of global terrorism and overlooks the political motives behind military interventions, creating a skewed narrative about the global conflict. The War on Terror myth obscures the true political and economic interests at play during these conflicts. Chapter 33. King Arthur was likely a fictional character. King Arthur is often portrayed as a legendary British hero who fought against invaders, but evidence for his existence is lacking. Most historians believe Arthur was either a composite of various historical figures or entirely fictional, created to inspire unity during turbulent times. The legend grew, blending folklore with history, becoming more myth than fact. The myth of King Arthur continues to shape how we view medieval Britain, but the truth is far more complex. Chapter 34. The Roman baths were not only for bathing. Roman baths are often depicted as places for bathing and relaxation, but they were actually multifaceted centers of social, political, and religious activity. People gathered to discuss business, hold meetings, and even socialize in these spaces. The myth of the baths as mere spas oversimplifies their role in Roman society and culture. Chapter 35. The Secret of the Bermuda Triangle. The Bermuda Triangle is often presented as a mysterious region where planes and ships mysteriously disappear. However, most incidents attributed to the Bermuda Triangle can be explained by human error, natural phenomena, and weather conditions. The myth of the mysterious triangle has been exaggerated by media and folklore, turning a series of explainable accidents into an enigma. Chapter 36. Cleopatra was not the last pharaoh. Cleopatra is often thought of as the last pharaoh of Egypt, but she wasn't the final ruler. After her, Egypt was absorbed into the Roman Empire, and Egypt's last true ruler was a Roman-appointed governor. The myth of Cleopatra as the last pharaoh romanticizes the end of an ancient civilization's autonomy. Chapter 37. The real end of the world wasn't in 2012. The 2012 end of the world myth was based on misinterpretations of the Mayan calendar, which did not predict an apocalypse. In reality, the calendar simply marked the end of a cycle, not the end of time. The myth of 2012's apocalypse misinterpreted ancient wisdom and played on fear, leading to global panic for no reason. Chapter 38. The First World War didn't have one single cause. The First World War is often presented as being caused by the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. However, the war's true causes were much more complex, including nationalism, militarism, imperialism, and a tangled web of alliances. The assassination was merely the spark, not the primary cause of the war. The myth of a single cause for World War I oversimplifies the complex web of factors that led to global conflict. Chapter 39. The Big Bang wasn't a single explosion. The Big Bang Theory doesn't describe a single explosion, but the rapid expansion of space from a singularity. The myth of the Big Bang often misleads people into thinking it was a violent event, but it was actually an expansion of space itself, not an explosion in the traditional sense. The language surrounding it often creates misconceptions. This isn't just an isolated event. What followed next in science changed everything. Chapter 40. The first computer wasn't a machine. Charles Babbage is often nary, credited with inventing the first computer, but it wasn't a physical machine. It was a conceptual design for a mechanical computing device. While he laid the groundwork, it wasn't until later, with advancements by others like Alan Turing and Konrad Zuse, that true computers were built. The myth about Babbage's computer overlooks the incremental advances and collaborations that led to modern computing. Chapter 41. The History of the Eiffel Tower. The Eiffel Tower is often thought of as a symbol of French culture and pride, but when it was first built, many people in Paris hated it. It was initially considered an eyesore, and its construction was highly controversial. Over time, however, it became a beloved landmark and a symbol of modernity and engineering. The myth of the Eiffel Tower's immediate popularity disregards its initial public opposition and transformation into an icon. Chapter 42. The Myth of the Confederate Flag. The Confederate flag is often misrepresented as a symbol of Southern pride, but in reality, it was primarily used during the Civil War by the Confederacy to represent secession from the Union. After the war, it was revived during the Jim Crow era as a symbol of resistance to civil rights, distorting its original meaning and fueling racial tension. The myth of the Confederate flag as a simple symbol of Southern pride erases its true, divisive history. Chapter 43. The Fall of the Berlin Wall wasn't just a spontaneous moment. The fall of the Berlin Wall is often seen as a spontaneous event, but in reality, it was the result of years of political pressure, negotiation, and a shift in global politics. The myth of the Berlin Wall's spontaneous fall ignores the intricate political negotiations that made it possible. Chapter 44. The Myth of Napoleon's Escape. Napoleon's escape from exile on Elba is often seen as a dramatic return to power, but the reality is more mundane. He was allowed to escape due to lapses in security and expenditure. His return to France was largely due to discontent with the new monarchy, not a heroic triumph. The myth of Napoleon's escape turns a security failure into an epic moment of defiance. Chapter 45. The disaster of Chernobyl wasn't just an accident. The Chernobyl disaster is often seen as a catastrophic accident, but it was also the result of poor management, outdated technology, and gross negligence by the Soviet government. The event was downplayed initially, and the full scale of the disaster wasn't understood until later. The myth of it being just an accident ignores the systemic failures that led to the explosion. Final payoff. So there you have it, the 45 biggest historical lies that shaped our world. What we've been taught is often a carefully constructed narrative designed to shape our understanding of the past. But the truth? It's far more complicated, and at times, even darker. These lies didn't just mislead us, they shaped the very foundation of nations, wars, and societies. Now, as you stand on the edge of this new knowledge, ask yourself, what other truths have we been told that are still waiting to be uncovered? History isn't just what we've been taught, it's the story we still need to rewrite.